Hello, everybody. Good evening. I am Patricia De La Garza, and you are at the right place at the right time because this is the Wizards of Box Live. And I'm here with my fellow wizards. So we have Monique Attinger from Toronto.
And here
Karla
it's 2:00 in the afternoon.
Yes, Karla Wiersma from Colorado, and Susan Owens from Texas. And so I'm talking to you from Brussels, so that's why it's dark over here. And today we're going to share something that we discussed last Friday. And I think it would be a really, really good thing just to share what happened Friday. Because to me, it was a perfect example what kind of information we want to make available to you in the group, in the Triangle Law Oxalates group. We were discussing about collagen and broth and bone broth and other broth and whatever. And everybody was bringing around their own experiences. Oh, when I feel bad, chicken soup is really good. And somebody, yeah, but the hydroxyproline is, it could be problematic. And if you have histamine issues, it's not so good. And everybody went back and said, okay, let's look at the literature. Let's start, seeing what's available, and let's see what are the mechanisms and the reasons why some people might find something very useful and some people might not. And I think that whole exercise just reflects some of the things that cause a lot of frustration. And we're very aware in the group. It's like, I've done this for 3 years and I'm fine, so everybody else must be fine. It's not necessarily the case. And we thought that talking about broth, its benefits, its maybe not benefits, might be a very good example of the kind of thinking that we would like to see more of in the group, and the kind of thinking that we want all of you to have whenever you see claims in other pages, whenever you see articles that, because there's lots of information. And that's one of the reasons also why, as part of the rules of the group, we do not allow the posting of other people's websites. And the reason is, first of all, logistics. It's much easier for the moderators to keep the information here, and then we control the information here. We can discuss it and we can control it here. But if we have to go and see what somebody else is doing and read their entire thing and try to come up with something, well, we're doing that in multiple sites, it becomes very, very complicated. So welcome, and I hope you're going to find this session very, very interesting. As always, please remember that we are assuming that you are under the care of someone for your health. This is the result of our experience and an interpretation of the current available science, and does not necessarily represent medical advice. And without further ado, we're going to start with this whole story around broth. Okay. So do you want us to share like the little document that we did, and then we go step by step like we did last time?
Yeah, it's a good idea because it is an area where there's lots of confusion about it, and where a lot of people have heard, as you were pointing out, Patricia, a lot of claims. So we definitely want this to be educational for you, but also it is that critical thinking process. It's that ability to be a little bit skeptical when you read something. Sometimes a thing sounds really good, but when you start digging into it, as we did here, we found that some of the claims were
optimistic.
What a great word.
Let's just say it that way. Actually, it's really interesting. And I think that's been one of the really big advantages that I've had as part of this group for such a long time. If not everybody knows me, I'm probably the most veteran person on trying low oxalates. I've been here probably almost close to 16 or 17 years. And one of the things that has really helped me is that idea of the critical thinking, and beware of people that speak with a lot of clout, a lot of, they are just, somebody's just saying, oh, this is good. And because they've heard it in another website, who heard it from another website, who heard it from another website. And when you start looking at the sources, you start finding them shadier and shadier. And just to have that little grain of salt saying, where is this coming from? Is the body of the literature that they're citing actually saying what the title is saying, what they're saying it's saying? And all these little checks and balances, I think, make us a more savvy consumer of information.
I think we also have to be not all or nothing thinkers. So when you hear these people who are saying everybody would benefit by, as soon as you hear everybody or nobody, you should be stopping and going, wait a minute. And then Susan was going to say something.
I was, you may have noticed that your doctor is not your pharmacist, that it's two different positions. One of them is selling stuff and the other is writing you a prescription for something. So it has been understood in that field that there is a protection to the client or patient or customer to separate those two functions of the person who's recommending something from the person who makes money from it. Now, that distinction has started to sort of drift a bit, especially because a lot of functional medicine doctors and chiropractors have started to sell nutritional supplements and things like that. But always just keep your mind aware if the person giving you information is the same person that is going to make money from giving that information. And that is just being a wise consumer, because if there's a connection there that they're making money from the advice that they're giving by selling you product, then you need to be a lot more cautious about what they're saying and check it out. Go into the medical literature, see if it's true.
Vested interests can mean bias.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we went back and started looking at some of the things that websites say in general. And one of the things that caught our attention, and actually I was one of the ones that believed that it was true, is the idea that broth was extremely nutritious. And it had a ton of minerals, and it was very good for to repair, to do a lot of gut repair. And so we started looking at all those claims. We started looking at all the different things. And that would be our first piece of advice. We're not saying it's good. We're not saying it's bad. We're saying beware of the claims. So check the claims. And we took an example that I think you're going to find interesting, because one of the things that we found in the websites that we were looking at, we looked at several ones, it was that broth was very high in calcium. And then Susan went back and say, can we justify that? Where is the literature? What amount of calcium are we talking about when we say high calcium? And lo and behold, we found some, the USDA says 2 milligrams per 100 grams of Swanson's beef broth, which is the one that was tested. It's not because one is better than the other. That's what we found with a reliable source of information. And just to put it in perspective, the RDA for calcium for an adult is about 1,000 milligrams a day. So that would mean that you would have to drink like 50 liters of broth to get your calcium in.
Yeah,
so,
because 100 grams of broth would be about equivalent to 100 milliliters, and give or take, that would be just under half a cup. for those of us who are in North America.
So those are the kinds of things. Susan made, do you want to share it, Susan? Do you want me to share?
Yes, I do. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay, nutrients in bone broths. Now I made this little chart here, and let me give you kind of a guidance of how to read this chart, okay? So these are the nutrients down here at the bottom that you can look at. And sure, they're there, but this is a log scale, which means that each time you go up a chunk, that's 10 times higher than the amount before, okay? And so this is a logarithmic scale. And you can watch where those levels were in both beef. I looked at all three of them, vegetable broth and chicken broth.
Now note, this is not bone broth per se. These are the broths, which I would call more like a meat stock that we tested through the Triangle Oxalates group. So we have tested a beef broth from Swanson, a vegetable broth from Swanson, and a chicken broth from Swanson. These are all easily available in the US market. They're not called a bone broth, but we wanted to start with like things that we knew the oxalate levels of, and you know, how much benefit are you getting from just a common broth that you might use to make soup or that you might use in cooking. And yeah, so with that context, I just want to make sure people aren't confusing, because we have so much confusion already between bone broth and other broths. So yeah.
And I mean, it has a lot to do with how long you simmer it and what you put in it, and if you leave other meat in it or whatever. But you know, we're not in the factory, so we don't know exactly how, when you buy it from Swanson, what exactly they did to prepare it. So, but we just wanted to have the correlation between what we had already tested for oxalate and you know, what was in what the USDA said. So you can look at the calories and the protein. There's not very much protein there at all. And the only thing that was kind of on the high side was sodium. And you know, that's salt, and a lot of people are like saying, oh, well, I don't want to do much sodium. Now, just as a warning, sodium is used by about a third or so of the transporters in the body to transport something else. So sodium's important. You know, you have to be aware of that when somebody says go really low sodium, because when I was pregnant with my daughter, I started getting a little bit high blood pressure. It wasn't really bad, but I was very concerned about using a medication or anything like that. So I ended up getting biofeedback therapy to try to lower my blood pressure. But they also wanted me to lower my sodium. So the whole time I was pregnant with my daughter, I was about below a gram of sodium. And I got during that time to where I didn't even want to be around any salt. You know, I could taste it so much because I got so used to the lower level of it. And so, you know, so much of this stuff, and this is what Patricia was trying to emphasize, is that we're not the same. I was different because I had been under a doctor's order to reduce my sodium. So how I was responding to whatever would be determined by having that as part of my medical history. And this is why we urge you so much that when you're trying to go through all this information, you really do need to talk to your doctor about it. If you have some special something or other that your doctor's doing with you that you know has some kind of impact, then talk to him. If you don't know whether it does or doesn't, then still talk to him, because he is responsible for putting all the pieces together and for knowing your medical history. So I'm just throwing that out, just getting at the sodium part. But then you can look at the other nutrients, and potassium is lower than sodium, and we've got magnesium, there's not that much. And then we're looking at zinc and copper and selenium, just tiny trace amounts. And then these are the vitamins. So if anybody's saying, oh, broth is really nutritious, what do you think the answer to that is?
Not very likely. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Okay, so
Okay.
we can go to our next point, I think, because we were starting out with the whole business of check the claims, unless we've got other stuff on the claims. Don't
No,
think-
but well, we can just keep going. So basically, the idea is check the claims. Check the claims, because the fact that somebody says it repeatedly, or that many websites say it, does not necessarily make it true. It could be true, but it doesn't necessarily make it so. So always have that little bit of a question mark, and just check the claims and make sure that you're following what you think you need.
And I want to say that I've seen, for instance, collagen advertised all over the place. And, it always should kind of put up the alarm bells whenever something appears out of nowhere, and then every channel that you turn on has the same advertisement, because that's just marketing, and the fact that suddenly they're talking about it does not, it by itself, it does not say that what they're saying is the latest and the greatest science and things like that. That's not how we figure out if something is legitimate, is not how many times it's mentioned on the internet or how many times it's mentioned on the TV and advertising.
Yeah,
Yeah, sometimes we're prone to fads, us humans. So sometimes we can get on a bandwagon with other people on a particular topic, and that's neither good nor bad, and nor is it always not incorrect. But it's not always correct either.
That's right. In the group, there's been a lot of discussion throughout the years on bone broth, because people say, no, do this because it's very good for your gut and it's going to do this or that. And then there's the other part of the group that says, no, I get so sick even smelling it. I get really bad reactions. So we were looking at different things, and we actually have a bibliography that we will be sharing with you at the end of the session, so that you see the kinds of studies that we looked at when we were looking at this. But I would say just be careful if you are dealing with histamine reactions. Just be careful, and maybe consider, like Monique was saying, a chicken soup versus a bone broth that has been cooked for 72 hours.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit, we have to see how everybody reacts. And as we keep moving down the comments, and you're going to start seeing that there's actually reasons for what we're saying. But we would just say, if you're not feeling right after taking some of that really long brewed broth, then listen to your body and, maybe consider removing it. And if you feel better, then you're in that part of the group and not in the other. And it's just something that is really important, is that whole idea. I always say, you're not a t-shirt. One size does not fit all. One size doesn't fit anybody. So just don't think of yourself as a t-shirt.
And if I can add to this, both Karla and I have made modifications to how you make a soup so that we're not making a quote unquote bone broth, but something which I have been calling meat stock to differentiate it from this broth / bone broth area. And I generally tend to make mostly chicken stock, so that's my default. And we will make it from a chicken that we've just cooked and we've stripped the, the main sources of the meat off. Those carcasses have already been cooked. So when I put them in with just water and salt, quite literally good quality salt, water, that's it. Then I'm only going to simmer it 45 minutes, an hour. Like I don't do a long cook. So we're not saying here that you can't have an ordinary meat stock. We are saying you really might want to think twice about these very long cooked ones. And we're going to get into more reasons why you might want to look at those as the next one, but certainly a shorter cook, and then quickly put it into the freezer or something to kind of turn off that histamine clock can be really smart.
Okay, and one of the reasons why we are saying this is because broth per se, as you will see in the spreadsheet, is not high in oxalate, but it is high in the precursors of oxalate, in the steps before. So it's very rich in something called hydroxyproline, and it's very high in glycine.
And that's especially true when it's long simmered. So you take it kind of to the next level, the longer you're cooking it, the more of the gelatin, hydroxyproline, collagen, glycine are going to be in that broth.
And of course, if you are in that area where you are deficient in B6, because you've had some antibiotics and your flora or your microbiome is not the way it should be, you're not producing enough, or you have another reason why you're deficient in B6, which could be putting you also into the endogenous territory, then you don't want to add, oxygen to the fire. So they can both convert to oxalate in the body. So that's one of the reasons why we are a little bit, cautious about it. And yes.
Yes. Well, I prepared some slides for everybody so that they could look a little bit at the science that's out there on this, because, we did not invent the science. We just read it. Okay. So let me see. I need to get back to my PowerPoint. And then, wait a minute. I have to do a screen share.
And just to prove we're not actually against a good meat stock, I'm actually drinking some right now in honor of our topic. Simmered for about 45 minutes this morning. And we will talk a little bit more about where some of the benefits might be too. But it really is a matter of understanding what impacts you can be having if you're doing something which your body's not ready for. Susan, it's yours.
Okay, so we're going to be talking first about hydroxyproline. This is the metabolism of hydroxyproline into oxalate. And you can see the hydroxyproline is up here. And see, there's several steps. This is not just, immediately following these steps. And so glycine is an amino acid, and it's also used a lot in detoxification. And so one of the things that we were talking about as the wizards were preparing for this was that glycine is one of the ways we detoxify salicylate. And it also is produced by the enzyme AGXT, which is the enzyme that is broken in primary hyperoxaluria. And this is a B6 dependent step. So you'll hear us talking a lot about B6 in this story, okay? But also, if you get a whole lot of glycine, it gets detoxified and turned into hippuric acid. And that is also measured on the oats. So you can see kind of how you stand as far as secretion is concerned. And then this is the enzyme that is defective in primary hyperoxaluria type 3. This is the one that's type 1. This is the one that's type 3. And then this is pyruvate. It's a partner with lactate, and you can also read their levels in urine on the oat. And then glycolic acid is right here, and it's also on the oat. But glyoxylate is not on the oat, and very few laboratories ever actually measure that. That may be changing now because they're starting to understand a relationship to diabetes. And, you know, so many people have that issue. But you can see that glyoxylate will turn via the enzyme lactate dehydrogenase, which is actually the enzyme that processes pyruvate and lactate, and will turn it into oxalate. So this is from Summit et al., and they were showing that glyoxylate can be changed into glycine via AGXT, or into oxalate via lactate dehydrogenase, or into glycolic acid via the enzyme that's broken in primary hyperoxaluria type 2, which is GRHPR. Now, another one that's being studied more recently is HOG-A, and that is the one that causes primary hyperoxaluria type 3. So here is that gene that they've identified, and this is from Medline Plus. And it says here, this enzyme is found in the liver and kidney cells, specifically within structures called mitochondria. Now, who wants to tell me what a mitochondrion does? Any wizard?
It's the energy.
It makes the energy,
Exactly.
right?
The little engines in the cells. That's how I think of it.
Absolutely. And see, one of the things, I do consults with a ton of people. And when I do consults, oftentimes I ask them if they have brain fog. And the reason I do that is because your brain is the one part of your body that uses more energy than anything else. It uses more energy than your skeletal muscles. You may have thought, oh, I just jogged around, you know, the big old lake or something like that, or around the park. And you thinking, oh my gosh, I've really put a strain on your mitochondria. But your thinking puts strains on your mitochondria, because a third of the body's energy is actually consumed in the brain. So just want you to kind of get that in the back of your mind, that if you have brain fog, it is likely that you have some mitochondrial issues going on there. Okay, so this is HOG-A causes primary hyperoxaluria type 3, and this is more of that article. And this is from that article, that there is still scientific debate about how all of this works. However, no one has studied HOG-A1 outside of kidney involvement. And so, you know, a lot of our projects that we started 18 years ago, the goal of that project is to look at how oxalate affects the rest of the body outside the kidney. Now, we're not leaving the kidney out, because that's real too. And plenty of our people have had issues with oxalate causing problems in the rest of their body and in their kidney. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that with you? And Patricia, that's happened to you, right?
Yes.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
What I just told you, is that what you're talking about?
Well, just the fact that you've had kidney stone issues before,
Yes, I
but you
have.
also have other ways that oxalate has affected you.
Yes, I've had kidney stones. My first kidney stone was when my kid she was probably 6, and we were at the beach, and it was extremely painful and excruciating. And it was just a little bit, it was right after we had started going low oxalate. My daughter which was probably even higher oxalate than I was because of her diet, never had a kidney stone, but I have. But the other way that I would excrete oxalate would be from my lungs. So I would have that day when I had that first kidney stone, I also had what was at the beginning diagnosis bronchitis. But then when they actually, the hotel doctor, came to me and started listening to me, and he says, you have less than 20% lung capacity. I'm putting you in the hospital.
Oh my
And
goodness.
by the time I got to the hospital, I had this incredible belly. And they said, the doctor couldn't recognize me. He's like, oh my gosh, what happened to you, lady? And so I was in the hospital, and finally they had to put a stent and help me pass the stone. And so, yes, I've been one of those lung dumpers on top of just kidney stones. So,
Well, the thing is, when you get to know the people in the field, it has been dominated almost 100% by the kidney doctor people. Okay, and so they did not want to involve people that were outside of their discipline, and so that is why when I did research years ago on autism and found the elevated oxalate in autism, there was no history of elevated kidney stones. And so that's why I knew that I needed to find out more about what oxalate does in the rest of the body and where it would go and why it would go there and what it might do there. And so that's why our project is really, really different from what most of the doctors were trained, because the doctors were trained hearing from the people who basically ran the field for all this time. And so until we get researchers who are looking at this other part, we're not going to learn anything about it. And nobody's going to study something that they don't get paid for. So it's a long process. And if you hear me talking sometimes on the group, asking for people to donate to the Oxalosis and Hyperoxaluria Foundation, or that kind of thing. The reason I'm doing that is that we really need to persuade the research to go to be covering all the areas that we have discovered together on our group. And I want to thank you all for your involvement in helping us accrue experience and data on how reducing oxalate has changed your life. So I want to thank you for that. Anyway, moving on. Hydroxyproline may have a lot to do with oxalate that derives from B6 deficiency. And, if you are familiar with the history of B6 and autism, the founder of the Autism Research Institute, Bernie Rimland, was really into this, and they were studying using B6 together with magnesium in kids with autism. And basically the only way they had of measuring anything at that point, because autism was defined as a behavioral problem. And so the only, measurements they had of success back then were whether behavior improved. And so a lot of the old studies, they are just designed that way of using B6 and magnesium, but they saw enough improvement just from that that he got together with a company called Kirkman, and they developed something called Super Nuthera. And that was a supplement that had a lot of B6, an incredible amount for a little bitty kid. Now, I know Patricia has been in this game a long time. So do you want to tell me what you knew about Super Nuthera?
That was the first thing. That was the first thing we tried that worked.
Okay. And when you say worked, what did you see change?
We started with a presentation of autism that was very, very severe. So my daughter was not only nonverbal, but she had no receptive language. She was self-injurious. She was a very unhappy little camper. And when we started the Super Nuthera, she started listening, turning around when we would, talk to her. She started being able to learn, really, because before that, it was so basic that even to call her for food, she wouldn't come. So I couldn't say, come eat, or, it's time to eat, or soup, or whatever that could be done. I would actually have to serve her plate and show it under her nose and kind of like pull her with it. Otherwise, she just wouldn't come. She didn't have any receptive language, and all of that started improving.
Well, that's really amazing. And enough parents saw the same thing, that once they started introducing that supplement, every child with autism wanted to be on it. And every doctor that was treating kids with autism at that point was using this Super Nuthera. And one of the interesting things that happened, and I discussed this a little bit in my endogenous oxalate presentation, the first one that I did, was that I looked at data from way back when. We're talking about 25 years ago. And I could see that while everybody was using Super Nuthera, the glycolic acid was really low in the kids with autism. But after Bernie Rimland died, and after the Autism Research Institute kind of threw away all that work and didn't even talk about it anymore, then that's when all of a sudden we started seeing these enormous levels of glycolic acid, which is the precursor to oxalate. So it is important to realize that at any point in history that you find yourself, when your child was diagnosed or when you were diagnosed with something, there are trends. And the doctors are following the trends. And so they're going to say, oh, well, the latest and greatest is X. And so they're going to want to be doing that treatment. And then sometimes they forget treatments that were done in the past that were actually effective. And so just be aware when you're looking at any condition, not just autism, but any condition, there may have been changes in the trends of how people were treating something. And it might be worth your while to go back and try to see, well, have there been changes? And what the doctors know now, is that exactly what they used to say? And maybe what they're saying now is better, but maybe they just forgot what was done 20 or 30 years before. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Has anybody, any of our wizards, have you found that you, in your journey with you or your family, have found that there was research that got unpopular, but it ended up being relevant to your child?
Well, I mean, I can speak to the Super Nuthera thing with the B6.
Okay.
That it was a game changer for Ian. He was pre-verbal. We were lucky if he did parallel play. I mean, he wouldn't, he just wasn't interested in interacting, short of me and his dad, really interacting with anybody else. And when we started that, he went from Mr. Isolation to suddenly he's playing next to kids. Then he's attempting to interact with other kids. Speech got better. It was garbled at first when he got it, but it got better, and it just more from a social standpoint than anything else. He just wasn't alone in his own world anymore.
Well, that's really fabulous. One of the things that happened is, just as far as the history was concerned, was our oxalate project started in 2005, and Dr. Rimland died in 2006, and he was really sick with cancer that last year. And so actually, I never had the chance to really present the case to Dr. Rimland of how his B6 work was really being authenticated with the findings that we had about oxalate. And the Autism Research Institute basically threw a lot of it out because they had other agendas and other things that they were running after. And so they basically never put together the relationship between the B6 story that Dr. Rimland had and the oxalate story. But I'm going to try to show you in the slide right here why it's so important. Now, at my first oxalate conference that I went to, I sat next to this Professor Ogawa. And the one thing that was very obvious at that conference, that all of these kidney doctors had an enormous amount of respect for this man, okay? And he sat next to me, and he showed basically this slide or a variant of it. And I asked him if I could borrow it from him. And so some of you have seen sort of a animated version of this that I've done before in different presentations, but it's still the same chart basically. And so this is showing that hydroxyproline can
Susan,
turn into.
there was a question in the chat. I'm just I'm interrupting you right there.
I don't
If
mind.
you could just say what hydroxyproline is. I mean, Monique already answered the chat for the people, but the people that are watching the video later will not be able to read the chat. So if you can just say what hydroxyproline is and how it ends up in the broth.
Okay, hydroxyproline is an amino acid, but it's an amino acid that is not part of the ordinary amino acids that form everything. It's more something that is specific to meat and cartilage and things like that. So it's a very unique kind of amino acid. Okay. Now, the thing is, what this study was about was giving, making I think they're rats B6 deficient, and then giving them intravenous hydroxyproline. And then they looked at the results. And so I want you to note the date, March 2007. This is 2 years after our project started. Okay, so we were getting into this kind of thing right when I met him, and he was about to do this study when I sat next to him at a conference. So look at the timing of events. These scientists found in rats deficient of B6 when they were given hydroxyproline. So this is the hours. You see those? Mm-hmm. 0. This is at the beginning when they just gave them the hydroxyproline. 1 hour later, 2 hours later, 3 hours later, 4 hours later, and 5 hours later. And so you can look at the urinary oxalate excretion went up really about 3 hours, and then it started coming down again. But the citric acid excretion was high at first, and then it went way, way down low. And you may have heard this, but low citric acid is the marker that kidney stone doctors use for indicating risks of developing kidney stones. And that is exactly why they recommend taking magnesium or potassium citrate to try to prevent making stones. So I met many of them, and they were not looking at B6 or metabolic citrus sources of citric acid at all when I talked to them at conferences. So when the hydroxyproline came from gelatin, and of course, when you're making a bone broth or something, you're going to end up with gelatin. And that's, you know, when you put it in the refrigerator and it has this jelly stuff, that's the gelatin. And so when it came from gelatin, this is from 10 grams of hydroxyproline. And, you know, each gram of protein has 4 calories. So this is a total of 40 calories. And you can look at the urinary glycolate here and the urinary oxalate here. So here's the oxalate on this diagram, and here's the glycolic acid on that one. And you can see it has a different shape to, you know, when it's high. The glycolic acid was high about 4 to 6 hours later, but the oxalate kept increasing over the whole 24-hour period. Basically, maybe went down a little bit at the end. And so this is the hours after eating the hydroxyproline. All right, this is another study where they were looking at HepG2 cells. And from Wikipedia, this is a human liver cancer cell line. So this is a Petri dish thing. This is something that scientists are doing. This is not in a living animal. And so they were looking at what was in the medium. So that means the stuff outside the cell, and they were looking at the intracellular, which is what was inside the cell. And they were looking at glycolic acid here, and they're looking at the oxalate over here. And you can see the shape of, you know, when it's high. Now, one of the interesting things is if you look at the oxalate on the medium kind, the stuff that was left the cell, it kept going up and up. But if you looked at inside the cell, the oxalate looked kind of flat. You see the difference? But the glycolic acid kept going up. Now, when you understand that glycolic acid turns into oxalate, that's more of an issue affecting what is measured outside than inside the cell. So that's kind of interesting. Now, this is another study, hydroxyproline ingestion and urinary oxalate and glycolic acid excretion. And again, Dr. Holmes and Dr. Knight have been the people that have been really doing most of the research on this. But here you can see the amount of hydroxyproline here, and then you can see the glycolic acid and the oxalate. I think this is oxalate over here. Yeah, on this scale. Okay. So are y'all convinced that there is a conversion going on here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okie doke.
So,
All right, now this is interesting that wheat contains hydroxyproline, but its excretion varied in celiac sprue. So they were looking at measuring hydroxyproline in urine in celiac sprue, and they saw big differences. Can you see the differences? Like this is 150 here, and this is almost 900 here. So it really depends on some other factors that are being true of these people. And this is, again, Patricia, I love the way you emphasize not one size fits all. You can't even say that if you have the same diagnosis. Every one of these people has the same diagnosis, but they're not totally alike. So they're not reacting and responding to the environment in the same way. And so one thing that you may be interested in is that I have 2 articles that I've written looking at the relationship between oxalate and celiac disease. One of them was an early article, and this has been very popular. Lots of people have read that, even in ResearchGate. It's thousands and thousands of people have read that. And then this is, I just posted it in there, oh, I don't know, about 2 or 3 months ago. And so it's coming along, but not as many people have read it. But it actually, my opinion is that the second article is much better. Okay, now, I also want to talk about the glycine that is in these broths and formed. And so I've said this before, a lot of people get really nervous because they're trying to do this one size fits all thing. But it is true that some people actually may benefit from glycine, especially if you have a salicylate issue. And other people, it might be more of a problem. And so who are the people it's a problem for? Well, it's people that have, whoops, do that, gene defect in these particular genes. So if you've done whole genome sequencing, like some of these, like Lias, that is something that makes lipoic acid. It's not on 23andMe. And so please understand that if the only genetic testing you've had has been from 23andMe, there are going to be some holes in the story that you're getting because it's not looking at everything. And so just so you know, I have gone through and found out what each one of these genes does. And this is way too complicated and scientific for, this presentation, but just know that people have figured out what these genes do and what their relationship is with glycine, and why if you have one of these defects, then you may need to be a little bit more cautious about things that get really high in glycine, or even taking glycine as a supplement. Now, does that make sense? Have you ladies heard of anybody who got in trouble with taking glycine?
We did have a couple of members on the Yahoo group that specifically talked about having problems with glycine.
Maybe the odd person has mentioned it, but it's not been as much a topic of conversation in the last while, other than wanting to understand whether it's an all or nothing thing. And so I'm glad you're going over the fact that some people may benefit from this, because people really get this idea that if they hear that something might not be good if you have an oxalate problem, suddenly you can't take any at all. Or, I don't know how they think they're going to take it out of their diet, but
no, I mean, glycine's like the smallest amino acid, and it's in everything.
And it's in lots of things. I was just going to say, so we do have a comment saying that someone had trouble with too much glutamate, but that is not related to glycine or to this area that we're talking about with broth. So I think that we haven't had a lot of discussions lately, but I don't know if anybody else has stumbled across this, but I've stumbled across the odd person who has been taking glycine powder to sweeten things. There was somebody on the internet who was advocating for that, and people were taking 8 grams of glycine at a time. And then all of a sudden that conversation got very quiet. So I suspect some people were finding out that taking 8 grams of glycine at a time 2 or 3 times a day may not have been friendly for them. So, we're really back to, it's not a one size fits all. Some people may benefit from taking some. You can't pull it all out of your diet. But let's understand and mitigate and not overdo. Like, I think it's also, you can have too much of a good thing. Right.
And You know, the saying, "Oh, to your own self be true." You've probably heard that quote. You need to know whether you are one of these people that if somebody says go an inch, you go a mile. Now, you know if that's part of your personality or not. If you are one of the people that goes overboard with anything you hear anybody say, then you're the type of person that needs to be the most observant about your own reactions and realizing that you really need to pay attention to what's going on, because it may be that whatever you heard on the internet or somewhere else may actually not fit you very well. And I love it that we're emphasizing that, my fellow wizards, because that's the name of the game. We have 53,000 people on our group. That means that we're going to pretty much find a little bit of everything. If you think about that, that's as many people as you get in a giant football stadium. I mean, that's a ton of people. So just be aware that you need to pay very close attention to, I did this and then that happened to me. And we may not know, like maybe now that you've listened to me, you know what hydroxyproline is, you know what glycine is. Okay. But a lot of people don't know what that is. But they just know that when I took collagen, this is what happened to me. Or when I took a whole bunch of gelatin, this is what happened to me. So the important thing is just to notice what happened when. And your story, you may not find the answer for 2 or 3 years. You may not find an answer for 15 years. But if you can remember the story and remember what happened in which order, then you will do a great deal to help yourself through all of this.
And go ahead, Monique.
I was just going to say, I think Patricia would like to screen share for a second. So
Okay.
maybe we can go back to our bullet points and then
Sure.
come back again as we
Because
go
I'm
through
done
the-
with mine.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
So if you can
just
stop sharing, Susan, because I can't see what Patricia's trying to share.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah,
Let me do.
it doesn't seem to swap. I don't know why. Okay, there we are.
There we go. So we've said it's not, so broth is not high in oxalate, but in its precursors, hydroxyproline and glycine, which is that great explanation from Susan. So you just have to remember, if you're deficient in B6, you don't want to go and do an enormous bolus dose of B6 either. Everything has to be done gradually. And you also have to see if you need any cofactors. And within this group, some of the cofactors that we mention always, when before starting B6, we're talking about biotin. Get your biotin in place and get your thiamine in place before you get into the B6. And we usually do the active form, the P5P. So
And your magnesium.
And your magnesium.
And you may actually need alpha lipoic acid in B2. Like I'm starting to think it might be a bit of a daisy chain there that you have to do.
Exactly.
So you're working your way up to our buddy B6, who may be doing more work.
We will be talking, often about all those cofactors and what you need, to make that famous wheel of your metabolism turn the way it should. But just remember that, yes, we're saying if you're deficient in B6, they can convert an oxalate, but that doesn't mean you go out and just, swamp your body with B6, because you might not be happy you did.
More is not better.
And we always titrate. We always start with 1/5 of the target dose and we start moving up slowly in time. So please remember that health is balance and your body's working very, very hard trying to keep everything in balance. And if you just give it like a swoosh of something, it's going to struggle to get it back in balance with that new incoming nutrient. So it's important just to, be kind to your body, be on the lookout for your reactions, and always do it, keeping that balance as much as possible so that you don't get the really extreme reactions.
And can I say one thing real quickly? A lot of people just think, oh, B vitamins, they're all the same. I'm just going to go take a B complex. And that, there's 25 milligram B complex, there's 50 milligram B complex, there's 100 milligram B complex. And what they generally do is give you the same amount of each one of the B vitamins. And in practice, what we see is that it seems like there's a proper order of introducing them one by one. And so if you give a B complex, you're totally not doing that. You're giving them all at the same time. And then you have no way of knowing, if you have a reaction, well, which one of those many B vitamins are you reacting to? And so this is why, again, we encourage people to go very slowly when you're using any kind of nutritional therapy so that you can know what you're like. It's just that we're so different, like the not one size fits all, that we can't just say, do this. And please don't get frustrated on our group that we're not this is our protocol and we do A, B, C, D, E, because we have learned the hard way that we need to be more conservative.
And it's important to respect your own body and the rhythm of your own body and the capacity your body has at this time, because maybe it's been sick for quite a while, or maybe, it's lacking energy, or maybe it's just so starved for one nutrient that it's going to overreact. So I think, just respecting those signals that you're going to be seeing in your body and just going low and slow. It's really the safer and the most respectful way, to treat your own body and to try to get to that balance, which is health. So we talked about the fact that it's not that nutritious, but it does lower inflammation. And that was something that, everybody has felt better. Well, I think, again, everybody, careful with this, everybody, but, I think everybody has heard of somebody that says, oh, chicken soup makes me feel so good after a cold. So somebody has had a good reaction to it because it does lower some inflammation. We have some papers in the bibliography that we're going to share with you at the end that does show that some interleukins are actually lowered, and that reaction, that inflammatory reaction, goes down. So, but you have to be careful about what you put in that broth, because very easily you can start putting a ton of celery or pepper or some other high oxalate thing, and sometimes it can get very high very quickly. So just be careful if you're adding any veggies or spices.
And I just want to say here that I have often drank chicken stock in response to some of the kinds of gut inflammation that I get, and it does actually help me. So when I found the research links that indicated that it was taking down some inflammatory factors, it doesn't indicate why or how exactly that might be happening, but it is happening. So there's some constituent in there which may be supportive. And again, not one size fits all, but perhaps like I've been doing here today. I also like it just as a drink. I took some chicken broth, I diluted it a little bit, I added some good quality salt so I'd get some minerals. And then that's been my drink during our talk here. So we're not saying you cannot have a good quality stock or that it won't have benefits for you.
Well, and also just realize that, life has its ups and downs, and sometimes you're sick and sometimes you're not sick. And so don't expect that what's good for you when you're sick is going to be something that you need to do on and on and on. There's some rhythm to it. So you may, let me just throw this out to you wizards. How many of you have found that you took a supplement and at one point it was a wow, I'm so much better, and then you took it at a different time in your life and it was not what it was before? I know that's happened to me at least 4 or 5 times with different things.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
just, beware of putting black hats and white hats on different supplements. Okay, because a lot of people want to do that. They want to say, oh, I can't take X. And then they don't know why it was that they needed, that it was the wrong thing for them right then, but it might actually be the right thing for them later. And so this is tricky. And I don't want to say it's easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, it may be the wrong part of the process for you to be able to handle a certain supplement. I am so glad we focused on minerals before we ever went to any of the B vitamins, because I think we just accidentally did the right thing, made sure we had the minerals in place that were cofactors like magnesium for B6 before we ever got to the B6 itself. And that meant it was a very good experience for us when we took it, but there's certainly lots of reports on the group of people who either take it early or take large doses, or one way or another have set their bodies off. And it may not be that they can't take it at all. It may be more, you need to have the right environment.
Factor.
Yeah. And have the right environment in your body, be at the right part of the work, everything. Yeah.
And I just want to say that this is the reason that we have the etiquette on our group, that we don't want people telling other people what to do. We want you to share your experience and share as much about your experience as you can remember. But the way I reacted 2 years ago is not necessarily the way I'm going to react to 2 years from now. And if that's true, and we're talking about fixed genetics in me, is certainly when we talk about this person on our group versus another person on the group, they can be very, very different. And there can be changes in the understanding of the science that happen as time goes on. So please be careful about labeling anything with a white hat or a black hat and then trying to put that on somebody else and say that they have to follow, the exact way you think about it is what everybody else has to think about it.
And I think that is the really good sentence segue to go into our last point, which is it a good idea for you to have broth in a low oxalate diet? And basically, I think as a little bit of a conclusion, many people in the group have had trouble with it. So tread carefully. Some who need glycine might benefit. Those with histamine or B6 issues might want to avoid it, or, help themselves with the precursors or supplementation. But always monitor yourself. Don't exaggerate. I think we've seen, especially in oxalate, that it's really the dose that's the problem. We're never going to have a no oxalate diet. It's a lower oxalate diet than what you were having last week. And just, keep moving down, keep trying to find that balance that it's exclusive to you. And just, be very supportive about what other people are in their own personal journey. And with that, I don't know if anybody, if I'm going to ask one by one, if you have like a closing statement, because we've been more than an hour. So Monique,
I think what I really want to encourage people to do is be open to whether or not something may be helpful to them, but also consider that the biggest dose is not the best dose. So I think part of what made bone broth and sort of those, highly enriched with collagen, gelatin, hydroxyproline, glycine, take off was because somebody like me may have had like a regular chicken stock and found, oh, my gut feels better when I do this. And I think that's a real hazard for a lot of us. A little bit was really good. So a lot more is going to be a lot better is not the right kind of thought process here. Sometimes a little bit is perfect. So it's the right dose, not the biggest dose.
Karla?
I would just add that what might not be helpful now may be helpful later, and vice versa. So, it may be great for salicylate, but once you're in a good place, you may find that maybe it's too much of a good thing. So it's just something, it's something to be cognizant of, that it can be helpful in some situations and not so helpful in others. And that's probably the easiest way to put it. It's really not one size fits all.
Yeah, we're not t-shirts.
Yes, I would like to stress that you may need to pay attention to whether your observations are occurring when you're dumping or when you're not dumping, because you may find that the you that you're looking at is not the same when you're dumping as when you're not dumping. And so just be aware of patterns, and whether when you tried something before, you were sick, that might make a big difference in how you reacted to it. So just, and I'm not the best person to say this because I can't keep up with notes very well. I lose them. But if you have a way to log some of this stuff, if you find that you're very like, I have these reactions and I don't understand them, then that's when you really need to be a good note taker and just say, you agree, Karla? So that you can tell, oh yeah, I forgot that, and I have had, I'm telling on myself, but when I had my super bad dump about 5 years ago, I couldn't figure out what it caused it. And then one of the list mates on our group said, don't you remember you told us that you introduced CoQ10 about a week or two ago? And I had totally forgotten that. So write things down and tell your friends what you're doing. And then you will get some kind of insight about these changes that happen with the hills and the valleys.
Absolutely. So we hope you have found this information helpful, and you will be able to find the recording of the session in our YouTube channel under Wizards of Ox, and in the main TLO group with the corresponding bibliography and the little document that we use today as a map for our presentation. Thank you, Wizards. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you. Oh, and the other thing that I wanted to tell you was that we're looking into changing maybe the day that we're transmitting this and start doing it on Fridays. So just stay posted in the group and we will let you know when the next Wizards of Ox is going to be on. Okay. Thank you so much. Be healthy. And remember, you are no t-shirt. Bye-bye.